voice, and the government is supposed to respond equally to everybody. If people don't have equal voices, if some people's preferences, needs are not expressed, the government is likely to pay less attention to them.
Those who do make their views known, either by voting or through other means, tend to be part of very distinct and specific groups within society.
There's no question that there's a social stratification of political participation, with the affluent and well-educated much more active than those who have lower levels of income and education. But it turns out that the driving force is not income, but education.
But since income and education are so highly correlated, people who are wealthier are more likely to be active.
The government is hearing less from the disadvantaged than from other parts of the public, and that means it's getting a disproportionate set of messages.
It also means that issues related to basic human needs, such as housing, healthcare, jobs, and poverty, are not getting the attention some feel they deserve.
And in fact, the people who have the greatest economic need and who have the greatest needs with respect to these basic issues of human life are less likely to be speaking for themselves.
Perhaps not surprisingly, those who generally don't speak for themselves tend disproportionately to be members of minority groups.
African Americans are active in politics, they are in office, they take part in politics in many, many ways, so in some sense, they're like everybody else. On the other hand, we find that in lots of studies, particularly those African Americans who have not moved into the middle class, really remain sort of alienated from politics somewhat, have a sense that politics is somewhere else, it's outside of their lives, that the polity, the government is not going to be responsive to them.
It turns out that in order to explain the difference between blacks and whites in level of political activity, you need only to look at things like civic skills, income, education, and the like.
And what happens is you get a kind of a vicious cycle. They believe that the government doesn't care about them, therefore why should they bother taking part in politics? Therefore the government cares less about them. People running for office know who's going to turn out to vote. And in some parts of the country, they pay less attention to minority groups than they do to other groups.
The tendency among some to bypass the U.S. political system is not limited to African Americans.
Women have had the vote now since right after World War I, and they vote as much as men, but they don't do other kinds of political activities quite as much. They're less likely to give money in campaigns. They're somewhat less likely to be active as campaign workers. They take somewhat less role in their local community. So there is a difference. And it's a very puzzling difference.
If you try to explain a difference between men and women in political activity, with men somewhat more active than women, differences between men and women in education and income are also important. Men are, in the aggregate, somewhat better educated than women. That gap is closing, and it will close over time. And it has to do also with the civic skills we get at work, with men not only more likely to be in the workforce than women, but also, if they have jobs, more likely to have jobs that give skills.
One of the ways you learn to be an active citizen is by working. You learn there the skills of organizing things, of speaking up. You get into networks where other people are active. And it was the fact that women were less involved in the workforce that played a major role.
But many sociologists believe there's another factor beyond education and work experience that explains why women have tended to be less involved in politics than men.
And when we looked further at the data, the main reason seemed to be that women were less interested in politics. And it wasn't only being interested, they were less informed. Women knew less about politics. The average woman was 15% less likely to know the name of a senator from her state than the average man. That's a big difference.
And one thing that we did was we actually looked at politics itself, and we said, well, if men and women are in environments where there are actually women who hold public office, who are running for public office, who are visible in politics, does that make a difference?
We looked at the few states that had a woman senator, and they were as likely to know the name of the senator and somewhat more likely to know the name of the senator. And we looked at lots of other data, and we found that, in fact, when women saw that politics was not only a man's game,